South by Southwest 2023 kickoff Women in Sports panel. And I am Thayer, Lavielle, and it's nice to see you. We've never done a panel like this before where we feel like we're post-game winning or losing, depending.
We're going to watch tape.
Yeah. We are. We're going to watch tape and see how it goes. But I just want to ask the crowd here, does anyone in here work in sports? All right. Okay. Does anyone, is any media partners in here? Okay. Okay, media. Any brands? Okay, we've got a couple in the audience. Anyone has ever been to a women's sports match, game, event? Okay, all right, we're looking at a fair amount here. Yep, okay, that was a late comer, so I'm gonna believe you. I'm not sure I totally believe that, but. So my name is Thayer Lavielle. I work at Wasserman, which is a global sports and media and entertainment company, and we represent an amazing amount of talent like Amanda Balionis Renner and Nkeka Ogwumike, who I will introduce here in a second more fully. And we also work with great brands and properties and media companies on how to basically bring their partnerships to life. And so the collective, which is apparently it's very packed, women's sports is on the come here. We can out-cheer them though if we want, you guys. So the collective sits in between all of these things, really leveraging all of the bits and parts that we have at our disposal within Wasserman to help push for gender equity within the sports space. And then we also get to create all sorts of tools and services to be able to serve the industry, serve our talent, serve our brands, serve our properties. So that's who I am. I do want to introduce our talent. Hold on, I have to read because you guys are totally impressive. First of all, Nneka Ogwumike, who is not only a WNBA champ, but she is a Nigerian-American professional basketball player. She plays for the LA Sparks. She is also the president of the WNBPA and has helped to negotiate some incredible groundbreaking points for women players today in the game, and will probably be a precedent for many other leagues, which is incredibly impressive. She's a native-born Texan and is traveling back and forth all over the place today. So thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And then Amanda Balionis Renner is a sports journalist. She works primarily in men's golf and is on CBS period and Golf Channel, and also is a passionate female golf fan, women's golf fan and supporter. And as a woman in the business, it's important that we see the perspective of not only she's looking in through the lens of being an outside in men's sports, but also just being a woman in sports and understanding kind of the differences there. So, and you're just both stars. Do you want me to hype you up anymore, or is that good?
I do the NFL as well, but that's it.
Oh, she does. She does the NFL too, right?
It's really hard. That's why I wanted the credit for it. Get your credit.
Yeah, you do a great job.
No, but that's it. You did great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about just really what we're here to talk about today, which is the investment of women, in sport, around sport. We can look at that from a lot of different ways. You've probably all seen and heard the tales of all sorts of increases that are in the media today, right? So there's increases in viewership, there's increases in attendance, there's increases in ticket sales, there's increases in sponsorship dollars. It's like great news, right? Except that it's like this, we're on the yardstick of life, we're going this far, where men's sports is so far ahead of us, which is honestly why we continue to try to find tools to help value and set women's sports up for success. So I want to start off this conversation actually talking about some of the proof points. Like, let's talk about some of the good news. Profitability, growth, women's sports is pretty obvious, I think, at this point, that we've all, people are starting to tap in and invest in new valuations for the NWSL. Like, it's great. What are the most obvious points in your worlds that you feel like, yep, we've made some progress? I'm going to start with you, Nneka.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess, and a real obvious point is, that I'm sitting here talking to you all. I think it's always important to relate these theories, these visions, these dreams to like what we are actually experiencing. And as you said, I have a very diverse background, and that of someone who isn't necessarily like properly represented in this country or in the world as a woman, as a Black woman, as a woman in sport. So I think we are both proof that something is happening. But more specifically, I think the accessibility around, in my case, like watching a WNBA game, the coverage, for example, this year's free agency, I think, was the most covered free agency in the WNBA. And then, of course, you know, having public valuation of the Seattle Storm and the talks around expansion, I think, unfortunately for us, we're still working on getting empirical proof point because there's a lot of transparency that we're lacking. But from the inside out, you know, I think that when we see these marketing deals, these brand partnerships and sponsorships, those are all indicative of an investment that is happening, an investment that is working. And I'm just excited to see that happen across a lot of women's sports right now. And yeah, that's kind of like my perspective
on it. When you're looking at it from the inside out, do you look at these other sports kind of longingly, or do you feel like, no, we're making our progress too, and what can we learn from them?
You know, it's because, like, you know, women helping women. So, like, I think in a lot of ways, like, we cheer each other on, and then there are times when we look at each other longingly. So, I might be kind of diving in real quick here, but, you know, when it comes to, say, our CBA negotiation, we got a lot of correspondence and a lot of seek for advisement from the NWSL, the NWHL, but then in the same way, you know, all of this news about expansion with the NWSL and all of these people coming to invest, there's a longing that we're looking at in that regard. And I think a lot of what we experience in both the longing and the empowerment has to do with us helping each other and knowing that we're gonna seek our own value in each other and find our own resources for each other, but then we're also still existing in a very racist and sexist industry that creates a situation where you have a successful soccer league and basketball league, but because soccer is mostly white women, there's less investment in the WNBA, you know? But then also too, in the WNBA, you have a league that was born from a very well-established league that has the advantage of being able to negotiate a CBA that can create proper value, resource, and protections for its players. So we're all existing in this kind of really crazy world, and we're trying to make it work, and I see the most success when we help each other.
That's cool. What do you see from your vantage point? Because you have an interesting and unique one.
And I will say, I use the WNBA often as an example of crossover that the PGA Tour and the LPGA should be utilizing more, right? When you turn on a WNBA game and you see NBA stars sitting courtside, I'm like, that support, that representation matters, right? Because if you're a Steph Curry fan, if you're a LeBron James fan, if you were a Kobe fan, and all of a sudden they're at that game and that's your favorite player, well, maybe I'm interested in that game, right? And I think the more the PGA Tour players can hype up the LPGA players, not in a fake way, by the way. These guys all live in the same areas. They practice together. They play money games together. And for some reason, that crossover hasn't happened in a way. So we, you know, you talk about looking longingly. I always use that as an example, and I'm sure there could be improvements in that as well. But I feel like you guys are way ahead of us in terms of that. So that's something that I feel like we really look to the WNBA and the NBA for. In terms of tangible things that I've seen with growth for the women's game and for the game of golf in general is the newly announced Grant Thornton Invitational that's coming up in December of the end of 2023, and it's going to be the first co-sanctioned PGA Tour, LPGA Tour event in the United States. So there's going to be men and women teaming up together, competing on the same course and the same conditions, and I can't imagine a better way to showcase the women's game than to putting them next to your favorite PGA Tour players. And we saw a little bit of that this past year. It was called the QB Shootout. The name will change next year. But Nelly Korda, number one player in the world, is out there striping it, and the PGA Tour players, their jaws were on the floor. And like this whole quote started going around, swing like Nelly. Like that's what the players walked away like. And she said, well, if you think this is good, maybe you should actually come out to a tournament because we all swing like this.
Yeah, she was on point.
And it was a poignant point, right? But it also was like, this idea of not shaming people, but simply opening that door up to say, you know, I don't think it ever works to say shame on you for not watching an LPGA event or a WNBA game, but hey, here's something really cool that you might be interested in. Come show up and see what it's like. And it helps when I think you have the best in the world that already have all that attention, showing that attention to their counterparts in the women's game. And that's what we're seeing now with the Grant Thornton Invitational.
Okay, so let's talk about what I would say you're talking about, which is really allyship at its truest form, which is really being able to speak on behalf of. So one example of this recently, Nneka, is when Breanna Stewart came out and said very candidly, hey, we need to do better for our travel, for our charter. We need to be able to get charter jets. We need to be able to not travel, you know, commercially in order to like, it's exhausting.
Right.
This is exhausting. And we're not setting ourselves up competitively to be at our best when we do this. And so many male players came out and said what she said. How can I support, right? How do we take that to the next level? How do we actually push that forward in some ways?
Well, actually, so I have a friend who has a podcast. It's called That Can't Be Right, and she interviewed a sports economist. His name is David Barry, and he really puts it very plainly. There's an emotional investment in men's sports. Owners don't care how much they lose. They just want to be associated with these superstars. And when we don't do the same for women and we only regard women's sports as a business, which they do not for men, it's just bragging rights, it's being able to flex, then we won't have this issue. I think the problem is that we regard women's sports as wins, losses, you know, are we in the red? Like, we're losing money. You're not even really putting that much money in it to care about how much is being lost. And in the same regard, you lose money on the men's side. Yeah. It's just the emotional investment, and that's where the sexism kind of comes into play, because most of these sports teams are owned by white men, and so the emotional investment is in men, and that's the standard. And so when Stewie says, hey, we need to travel better, it's because we do, because we're doing the same thing, we're competing at a high level, but everyone keeps saying that it's going to cost a lot of money. Well, there's things that are costing even more, that are incredibly more trivial on the men's side of things. And it's unfortunate, like, you know, I love that you said that the guys come and sit courtside, but there needs to be more action. It feels like it's starting to trend towards being more performative, even if they're on Twitter saying, hey, yeah, what she said, but like, what are you really doing? Because I'm inside and I know what's happening. Yeah. And it's just holding them accountable to seconding what she's saying. Now
but maybe that's because they're not sure what to do. I think for a lot of male allies, they want to show up, they just don't know what to do. Is it on us to tell them?
I guess for me, I don't understand how they don't know what to do when it's happening for them.
Right.
That just doesn't make sense to me, personally. We see it exists. It's the want to. It's the want to. It's not what to do, it's wanting to. It's the emotional investment, you know? And that's why I always try to tell people, feminism is not exclusive. Everybody came from a woman.
Facts.
So that emotional investment should, like the emotional investment is literally genetic.
Right.
It's also this idea too of like, I just think that's one piece of it, and I think it helps, right? But I think about when you talk about the women investors now on the soccer side, you have Glennon Doyle, you have Abby Wambach, you have Natalie Portman. Maybe it isn't this idea of trying to get these maniacal sports fans in the men's world to come over to us. Maybe it is tapping into a whole other world of women fans, of super fans who didn't even know that they would love this.
Exactly, right? What it is.
Right.
Because right now, we're operating from numbers that don't exist. Yeah. Because no one is seeking the market that has not been tapped. So once the market is tapped, then it's like, oh, wow, look at all these fans.
So invest now, the going is cheap.
So it's not like it's almost like sometimes I think we can get lost in fighting for this one group of people, and that group of people just might not be for us,
Right.
right? Like, and that's
it.
okay,
Yeah.
but there's a whole other world out there that we're not targeting in the exact right way.
100%.
And you show that, and all of a sudden it's like,
Oh,
So
wow.
does that come down to storytelling in your mind?
oh
Yes.
my gosh.
Representation,
Yeah. See, this is where I get
storytelling.
fired up. Yep, it is. Yeah, the way women athletes are portrayed matters. And I can give an example, and I won't name the tournament, I won't name anything about that. But I was helping to cover a tournament of women, and a producer came over to me and said, hey, can you take a look at this? And I looked, and it was right before a very intense opening round. It's one of the biggest competitions in this space in the world for these women. And they showed the women walking, the hype video was them hugging their moms, high-fiving each other, hugging each other before they walked up to the first tee. And I said, so if this was Rory McIlroy heading to the first tee at a major championship, is this what you're showing, is his hype video? And he said, well, no. And I'm like, okay, so why is that? We're making them seem so trivial. Like, these women are not there to compete. Like, they're not athletes. Like, there's no intensity. Why don't, you know what I mean? Why are we choosing to show them in this soft, non-competitive way? And we choose to show these men in this badass, intense way that gets people ready to go. So we scrapped it and we completely redid it, and it turned out great, right? But it's that inherent, if there wasn't someone to stand up and say, wait a second, that's not right, that doesn't feel right, it would have gone out into the world, and that just continues to add to, well, women's sports is lesser than, it's less competitive.
Exactly.
They're less exciting to watch. I think that's really what it comes down to, is like, that hype video was not exciting.
Right.
Right.
So that's what's going to be put out into the world, and that's what's going to be interpreted by everyone who viewed it was, well, that's just not exciting. Why would I want to watch that?
But do you feel like then, as somebody who's in the media, that media companies, the big networks, to online, to print, to whatever it is, should have trainings around that, should really have a clear focus on saying to that cameraman or that producer, if you're going to be covering the LPGA, here are the things that you need to do, because everybody is just going to walk in with inherent bias.
Yeah.
That's how we've all been taught.
And I'm not sure if it's even the broadcast itself, right? I think the goal is to get people, and maybe that is something to work on. Golf, we've been working very hard on making golf more exciting to watch. Once you tune into the broadcast on the men's and women's side, it's just kind of a hard thing to do with the number of factors, and I think we're getting there, right? So hopefully that technology...
Announcing in a whisper.
Announcing in a whisper does not, in fact, get the people going. And that's not really why people are tuning in, right? People are tuning in to golf for a very different experience. But I would say the thing that we can change is the social media parts around it. Like, that makes such a big impact. Don't you think? Like, that's where people can find their new favorite player. That's where people can find, oh man, I love the way that person dresses, or the way that person acts, or the way they swing, or what they wear when they work out. Like, just those visual cues and that immediate 30-second soundbite or 30-second, quick video can get someone interested in a new athlete in a different way, make them more relatable, or make them not even attainable, just someone aspirational even, right? And I think we see that done so well for golf, and I'll let you speak to the basketball side, but for golf, we do that so well on the men's side, and I don't think we do a good enough job of making these women the badass women they are in that space, and that is on us.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree, and I think, I'm not sure if like a training will necessarily help or fix. I think it's, like you said, it's a representation. I think because a lot of, for example, putting together that highlight, any person would have been like, oh wow, that's really nice. But like, I think a lot of what happens when we present things, whether it's on social media, when we're highlighting things, when in sports, as it pertains to women, as it pertains to Black women, I think a lot of it is subconscious.
Yes.
And so bringing in those who are more conscious about it, I think will kind of change the landscape much faster than trying to tell people, hey, this is how it should be. Because what happens in culture shifting is that it has to be experiential. It's not something that can necessarily be taught, but women have a way of kind of permeating the landscape, because we are born in the resistance. And so we have a way of thinking, we have a way of being agile that can't necessarily be taught, but can be experienced and hopefully change perspective, so that now when you're looking at Asia Wilson, you're not trying to say, oh, she comes from a hometown and she loves her family. No, like, she's a beast.
Yeah.
She's a beast because
Right.
she's an athlete,
Right.
Yes.
And it takes the representation.
Yes,
it took
it does.
someone like you to come in and say, like, what is this?
Right. And his feelings were very hurt.
Good.
But it's true. It's like sometimes those uncomfortable conversations have to happen. And to be fair, and we were talking about this earlier, 5 years ago, I would not have had the courage to say that to him. But I felt like I have worked to a point where now I can use my voice for the things that I know are right and wrong, and I'll be respected for it instead of being punished for it.
Exactly.
And that also comes with the changing of the times too over the last 3 years, right? I think now we are given that permission to speak up about diversity, equity, inclusion, what that means, what that should look like, and those conversations are allowed to happen. Where I don't know if I would have felt that they were allowed to happen even 5 years ago.
Let's actually shift to that, because we were talking a little bit about this last night, this mentality, particularly among women, that's either like, you have a scarcity, like there's only room for one woman at this table. And that is I would say a generation above mine, because they were the ones breaking the glass ceiling and they had to fight in a bar fight to get there. I feel like there's a massive shift that's happened within the industry since I've been in it. That is like, nope, come one, come all. And it's quite jarring when you meet women today that are still leading from a place of scarcity. I would say Nneka, the WNBA has really shown this collaborative spirit, particularly around social justice, around BG, around all of these things really coming together, and has even bled into other culture, like certainly the men's side of the game, but also just broader culture. Can you speak a little bit about that? I don't know whether it's just generational or just how the W is set up.
Yeah, I mean, I think one, I would say that we have more of a privilege when it comes to, our league, because we were birthed from the NBA, and so there's this existing infrastructure that provides us sustainability for us to be able to use the platform adjacent to, and then kind of that mixed with us being a league of mostly Black women. It's inherent in us to have these convictions and have these thoughts around things that directly affect us, our families, and our communities. Now that, of course, kind of mixed with the spirit of the woman, which is empowerment and collaboration and doing things in unity, is kind of what has created this pathway for, social change and social impact. It's nothing that we had like on our 5-year plan, it's just, I always say that, the movement kind of met our moment, and our moment has always been, insular, because if you're a WNBA fan, you are, if you're not, you're not. But after a while, we started understanding like the power in numbers, and our first instance was when Philando Castile was shot, and we were like, hey, there's some bigger things happening. That happened in one of our markets, and there were players that had enough to say, hey, we need to do something. We need to say something about this. Like, we have a platform to be able to say something about this. This happened down the street from the Target Center. Like, this hits home. And at that point, I think we all realized, oh, wow, I feel a type of way about this, and we have to say something. It's happening in our season. It's in the news. And so we wanted to do something that could at least represent the community and hopefully bring the conversation of change forward. And once we had that experience and also fighting our league on what we wanted to do, we realized that there are so many things way bigger than basketball that we can achieve without feeling as though we're risking our careers. Because when you do it together, it's easy to say no to one person, but to look 144 women in the face and say no, who's gonna do that? Who's gonna do that?
Right.
That's why she's the president of the WNBPA.
So understanding the power in numbers, but most importantly also to listening to who has the stage. And that's something that we've learned that we've had to do along the way, because for so long we haven't been listened to. And so in that moment, we listened to the Minnesota Lynx. And then with the CBA, we were listening to the majority of the players, which is really like the middle, kind of like the middle player, not the top player, not the rookie. Most of our league is that middle. And so that's kind of what also helped us negotiate the things that we ended up signing in our collective bargaining agreement, which prepped us for the bubble season. And in the bubble season, of course, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. And so it's almost as though what was already in us was kind of brewing, and these life happenings, these world happenings started occurring, and we understood how our last experience helped us with this, and then we were kind of able to use our own experience to like learn along the way. And you know, we can now say that we helped flip the Senate seat, which is not what we wanted to do. What we wanted to do was support our sisters at the Atlanta Dream. And as players, there's this level of shut up and play, which honestly I wish I could. You know, I wish that was the case. Yeah. I feel like we all wish we could just go to work and do our jobs, and that there's no and there's no problem. You know. Yeah. So no, I love that, but we can't. And you know, in that moment, we were all physically together at once, and we were able to have really hard conversations. We were able to listen to those who needed to be listened to the most, and figure out what we needed to do in that moment within our power. Yeah. And we found out that you can do a lot by just doing things together, having these conversations, and understanding what's most important for those who need it the most. Yeah. And that's just kind of how we've been moving.
But a pretty powerful visual message to see all of you guys come out in the same shirt every single game.
And I think that it's important to understand that, because you know, even in the bubble, there were times when some of the black players did not have the capacity to deal with what was happening at Atlanta. And those were hard conversations that we had. I had a conversation with Sue Bird, and she was riled up about what was happening in Atlanta. And for the most part, if people don't know, there was an owner who said some crazy things, was trying to be reelected. To this day, the strategy was to never say her name. I've never said her name. It's like Voldemort. And that's why I'm not saying her name, because we didn't want to give it power, because that's what she wanted. And so Sue was like, what are we gonna do? And we're in the bubble, and I'm like, Sue, I can't lie. We got the bubble here. Players don't have adequate food. There's a virus. There's no vaccine. You know, our bubble doesn't look like the men's bubble. And I was like, hey, I don't know, but can you handle it? And she was like, you know what, I get it. That's fine. I'll do something. And so she worked with Elizabeth Williams, and they kind of just focused on that. And a lot of times that's what it takes. And I don't think people understand in the W, like now everyone looks to us to see, oh, what should we do? What should we do? And it's not as though like we have a plan. We just understand how to empower each other. We understand how to support each other. We understand how to listen to each other, because no one's done it for us. So we have to do it for ourselves. And there are times when it's advocacy, it's allyship within our league, because our league is made up of so many different women. And so we're just kind of a microcosm of how we feel things can be handled in the world. Yeah. And that's what I try to impart upon people, instead of just, you know, doing one protest and it being over, asking for this DEI panel and not doing anything about it. If you're not, I tell organizations this all the time, because of my role, I get asked to speak on these panels about diversity, equity, inclusion. What should we do? How did you do it? If you're not doing it at home, you're not gonna do it at work.
Right.
If you're not doing it at home, you're not gonna do it at work. Yeah. If everyone at home and in your personal life looks, thinks, and acts like you, what makes you think that you're gonna go and lead a team at work and do the same thing? So you have to expose yourself, like I said, to different experiences, to people who can speak up, and even in your situation, it took time for you to get to that point. Yeah. It took time, and that's the whole point, is that it's not gonna happen overnight, right, but we can evolve together by experiencing each other and by listening to each other.
Yeah.
So men's golf in particular is vastly different than the WNBA in a bubble. I can imagine. How, like, you talked about this growth of feeling like stepping into your own confidence about being a woman, but that's also just, I think, matriculating up a ladder and feeling like I've got this and understanding your job.
Yeah.
What is that ecosystem like as a woman executive, as a woman just walking the greens?
You know, I would say I wish that my response to Scarcity was the same as yours, in that we all can come together and support each other. I'm not sure if we're quite there yet in the broadcasting world in general.
Yeah.
It still feels like there are very few roles that are designated. You turn on the TV and you pretty much know without exception, with maybe one or two exceptions, when you see a sideline reporter on the NFL or college football, is it going to be a female? Of course it is, right? That's our role. That's what we get to fight for. You know, Beth Moen's obviously doing an incredible job breaking those ceilings, and Hannah Storm doing the same thing, but they're still right now the exception to that role. Andrea Kramer as well. You know, when you turn on golf, usually, and the LPGA is different, but on the PGA Tour, the female is going to be the one doing the interviews, right? NBC, the female on that announce team is going to be, you know, the female's usually doing that same role, and it's one role, and then the surrounding cast are men.
Right.
So I think when you're coming up, at least I feel like when I was coming up in the broadcast world and fighting for these jobs, I understood there was a very small window that I was competing for, and I was capable of doing it at a high level, and it does create this scarcity because there simply aren't that many jobs. And I think about still every single day, if I lose my job with CBS, I don't know where I would go. Like, there's not like a whole lot of, you know what I mean? At that level, there just really doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of other places to go, and that might not actually be true. Right? But that's kind of the way I've been conditioned to think, and that is kind of what ends up keeping you in this box, and what keeps you kind of behaving the way you know you need to behave and saying the things that you know you need to say, because you work so hard and you feel like you're fighting against in the ecosystem and fighting against so many things of, well, you just got that job because you're blonde and you have big boobs and that's what that role looks like, right? And maybe it did start that way, but there's now a million people who are so qualified and so intelligent to get these roles, and how do we bring people in that look different than that, right? Like that was a whole nother conversation, and it about 100 years too late. So there's so many things at play, and it feels like everyone's fighting for one role, for two roles, whatever that is. So I think that scarcity is still there, but it does take an intentional thought process. I have a lot of friends that do the same thing I do, and from, Tracy Wolfson, who was our A-team sideline reporter, she's amazing. And the first time I met her, I wasn't sure what to expect, and she came right over to me and said, anything you need, you call me. And that mattered. Like, that mattered, that she wasn't saying, oh, she's a threat, I think she might be coming for my job. That isn't what she was saying. She told me how great she thought I was, and she wanted to help me in any way that she could. And that made me change the way I was approaching people who I felt like maybe were trying to take my job, right? And sometimes maybe when someone says to me, I want to do what you do, there might be something in my head that says, oh man, okay, they're going to be competition, but the words that come out of my mouth are, that's not right, and hey, here's my phone number, call me if you need anything, right? So it's that change of scarcity within ourselves, right? Like you said, if you're not doing it at home, you're not going to be doing it at work. And I feel like even if we're conditioned to do the complete opposite and protect ourselves at all costs, if we can acknowledge that maybe that's what's happening because we've been conditioned to do that, and change the words coming out of our mouth and build these relationships that feel so counterintuitive to everything we've been taught, that's where the change happens. It doesn't necessarily feel comfortable all the time, but it ends up creating an incredible environment that we never experienced, but we get to now create and pass down.
So that is, and sorry, can you guys just keep me posted on the timing?
Does that make sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
it does.
Yeah. It doesn't always feel great, but that's really just breaking down, the things that we were taught and the things that were instilled in us, and now we have to undo all of that.
But I also think it's about the investment that you're talking about, and you're talking about into future generations, because you're setting the example for women coming up behind you, and honestly men. to show how to collaborate and lift up.
Yeah.
And we talk a lot about that, at Wasserman and the collective, just in terms of us trying to be as intentional as possible in creating opportunities for women and men to gather together to just make the company, certainly within Wasserman, but the industry smaller, so that we're having these conversations without any friction. That is just about celebrating what is good instead of, while still there's a lot of times we can talk about what's bad out there, and it's, to quote Megan Rapinoe loosely, it is exhausting having to constantly fight for your value and fight for your worth and to remind people of that you should be given equal. Like, it's exhausting.
Right.
Why can't people just see it already?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that too, and I think you make a really good point when it comes to, I don't know how many panels I've talked about investing in women, whether it's in sport and business, but it is really tiring to constantly talk about what we do not have.
Yes.
It's very tiring, especially because, one, we're not a charity, but two, there's some really awesome shit happening.
That's right.
And it's almost as though, like you said, this system has been created to constantly talk about the losses, the lack of gains, what's not happening, because nobody wants to actually do their homework and understand what's going on. There's a history here. I mean, even just plainly, the WNBA is, I think, turning 28 or 27?
27, I think.
27? The NBA is almost 80.
Yeah, that's right.
So in real life, would you normally compare an 80-year-old to an almost 30-year-old?
Right.
Apples
And their
to
revenue
apples?
and their...
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, so if we look at it as we know how, it makes sense. And if you even look at it as we know how, where the WNBA is at 27 is light years past where the NBA was at 27. And so those are the things we don't talk about.
Yeah.
We don't talk about those things. And when I first became president, it was all about, we gotta fix this is burning, like, sky's falling, we gotta do something. And so, I kind of, I was a little bit energized by that, like, hey, okay, well, I'm gonna come in here and fix it. And now in my third term, I'm still kind of having the same conversations. I've mellowed out because I realize it's not gonna happen overnight, but I'm also tired of talking about why. It's not why should you invest, it's why aren't you? Because you are going to be late to the party if you're not already. Yeah. And it's because all of this awesome stuff is happening. And so I've kind of leaned a little bit more towards, look at what's going on. We're playing 40 games this season. We've announced our all-star months in advance so people can activate and sponsors can be there. We can sell tickets,
Because fans are growing
because
and they want to show up.
Yeah.
That's the
and we
good
need
news.
more time
Yes.
to accommodate more fans
That's right.
and more accessibility.
That's right.
So I've leaned more towards these things rather than,
That's right.
what's going to happen,
But I
right?
think that's the point of what Megan had said was it's exhausting to have this conversation, and the part of it is that the part two of that is, can we just get to the action?
Right.
Can we get to the solutions here, right? And it's about engaging in this new fan base that is a younger fan base coming up looking at that. By the way, PGA Tour is trying to engage, PGA is trying to engage, LPGA is trying to engage, NBA is trying to engage, NHL, like everybody wants this new younger fan base, and they don't get them because they are consuming completely differently. They are demanding that partners and brands and athletes act differently and help to solve some of the world's problems today. It's an expectation. It's not a nice to have. It's an expectation. And we will reward you with dollars, they're saying. We will reward you by buying your stuff. So that shifts the way, or should shift the way, media covers it. Leagues start to invest back into their fans. Teams start to invest back into their fans. The ability for women athletes today to monetize is so much greater than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I mean, NIL alone, just the stats of women outpacing so many men in that game, if you will, is incredible. But a lot of it is because this younger generation, from the stats and facts that we see, are turning to athletes and looking at them as their own brands. And so I was at a Celtics game the other day. I love me some Celtics, okay? And I was sitting in a seat, and there was these two young kids next to me. And I said, "Oh, who do you pull for, Cleveland or the Celtics?" And they said, "Oh, I just pull for this guy and this guy." Yes. What? 100%. Yeah. What? Like, you better bleed green if you're next to me. So I see it in my own house, like it's a very different model. And so as we look at this new fandom, I'd love to understand, how is that coming through? Like, what are you seeing in kids, not little kids, but like teens coming out? Because we see this across WNBA, we see this across women's golf, even men's golf. They're just flocking to this in a whole new way. What are you seeing?
Yeah, well, and that's why I was talking about the importance of social media now, right? It's almost like the broadcast in the game is secondary to what they're seeing and what they are digesting, and what that athlete or their team or that league is choosing to put out about that person, right? Because everyone is their own brand, and golf is so different because that's always been the case, right? These guys are all CEOs of their own companies, and they are literally just trying to build their own brand and separate themselves in whatever way they can. And I would say someone like a Ricky Fowler or Lexi Thompson, like, they're kind of the exceptions to that rule. Like, they kind of were ahead of the curve in that. Like, Ricky Fowler is always the example I give. It didn't matter if he never won or if he won 5 majors. Everyone around the world was wearing those orange Puma hats, flat brims, wanting a Ricky Fowler signature. He moves the needle regardless of his performance, which is probably, that's the dream, right? Like, that you don't have to always have the best game or go out and win a bunch of tournaments. Your fan base loves you for who you are. They think you're cool because of what they're seeing off the course, off the court, whatever that is. And I do think a big part of that is just that, I just keep coming back to these commercials that we see now all the time, for Callaway, TaylorMade, Titleist, whatever it is. And just recently are we starting to see in these commercials the all-star PGA Tour players and the LPGA stars splitting equal time on those commercials, right? Watching Nelly Korda bomb a drive off the first tee and then cutting to a Jordan Spieth doing the same thing, or having them be treated as equal superstars and equally as powerful on these commercials, which are then distributed digitally, and all of that social media content that is taken in and then distributed on their personal accounts, right? It's different, and it's reaching different demographics because they're able to control their own narratives, I think, in a different way, but also that has the support of their sponsors, of these companies, of the industry.
But do you think that in that case, specifically, that because of Nelly's youth, as well, that she'll be allowed to kind of color outside the lines that is golf, which is pretty traditional in a lot of ways in terms of what players have traditionally been seen as able to do, to be able to reach out to showcase her personality.
Michelle Wie is a great example of that. We were just talking about her earlier. One of the things I've always loved about Michelle is, listen, she's a phenom, right? She was expected to break the golf world at 13 years old. But she was interested in art. She was interested in fashion. She was interested in cooking. And when you went to her social media accounts, it wasn't just Michelle Wie, the golfer. It was Michelle Wie, the artist. It was Michelle Wie at New York Fashion Week. It was Michelle Wie in her kitchen cooking up things that, oh, now I want to follow her cooking account and get her recipes. Like, that's the thing, creating this, being able to showcase who you are as a human being, to make yourself relatable. And golf is not necessarily the most relatable sport. It's not the most relatable sport. But to have these athletes understand that and now come meet people where they are in a whole different way, I think is what is helping the game grow. And the women contingency is the fastest growing part of golf in general right now. And golf is booming, right? The pandemic, who knew it was going to take a world pandemic to grow the game of golf, which is what everyone's been trying to figure out how to do. COVID hits, people start picking up golf clubs in the bubble. How many of your teammates and friends started because it's the only thing you could do outside.
It's the only thing we could do
right?
outside, yeah.
So all of a sudden it starts to grow and people are like, oh, this is actually kind of fun. And younger girls are starting to go out there and join their junior golf league. We never saw that happen before. And so if you can take these little girls who now are semi-interested in golf for the first time, and they can find a Nelly Korda, a Jessica Korda, a Danielle Kang. Yes, and then it's like, oh man, this is, or even the influencers, right? Like there's so many golf influencers out there now doing trick shots and, just making the game look cool, doing golf art. And
do you think, though, that also,
great.
like, the influx of Topgolf and new
Yes.
formats will also really help?
I went to Netflix just released that Full Swing documentary, and their premiere was at a Topgolf with DJ Khaled. If you would have told me 10 years ago when I got into golf that I would be at a golf event with DJ Khaled and he would be swinging a golf club, and Serena Williams, by the way, was down in another thing, I was like, it gets me so excited because I'm like, the fact that they even want to swing a golf club,
that's cool,
is making our sport more accessible. It's making it cooler, and now we just have to figure out a way to capitalize on that and not let that go, because for so long it was just the old white man rich sport, and Topgolf is making it accessible. Popstroke is making it more accessible. Executive courses, public munis are now starting to become cool. Right? So it's like leaning into that and showcasing
and I think
it.
Showcasing the party that is Waste Management Open can showcase the amount of fun that watching golf can be.
Oh my, yes.
And
being
those guys
doused in
definitely
beer
have
on the
fun if you're not
16th
clear
hole.
on the 16th hole.
Yeah, 20,000 fans pour in there. I'll never remember interviewing Mark Cuban. I think the last time the Super Bowl was that 2011 or 12, Patriots Seahawks, when both were in Phoenix at the same time. And it was.
Patriots won.
Okay, yes, they always won. We get it. Go Steelers. But when I was on that hole and I was working for PGAtour.com and I was on the 16th and I look up and Mark Cuban is in the general admission, the madness. He was deep in the madness on the 16th hole, and I went and I shoved a microphone in his face. I don't even think I asked him for permission. We just went live with the interview because I was really scared he was going to say no. And he said in the interview, I don't even like golf. He goes, I hate golf, and this is cool. I would invest 10% in this hole. This was like peak Shark Tank era, right? And that in a nutshell was the moment where I was like, this is how we grow the game. Right? Like, find the things. Not everything has to be the same. Not every tournament has to feel the same. Why not be able to bring in a huge party vibe one time a year, 1 week a year, and bring in those mad sports fans who want that same feeling in golf and let them have it?
And let's do that in women's golf too.
Yeah, hell yeah. Right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, quick question, because I think we're coming to time. I actually have no idea. Is that right? Yes? Okay, 10 minutes. Thank you, Nick, in the back. Yep. I want to talk about investing in ourselves, okay? Because I think as women in the business, and we all travel a lot, you have a physical job more so than certainly I do. How do you actually take the time to making sure that you're investing in your own well-being? Because I think it's something that as women, we tend to want to serve others before we serve ourselves.
Yeah, this has been kind of a hard way for me to understand my own investment because, like you said, I have a physical job. And so I even have to separate investment in my physicalness and my well-being, because when you start mixing them, then it becomes very difficult to decipher, am I doing this because I have to, or am I doing this because I need it, And so in the last few years, because we don't have the resources, I hired my own strength and conditioning coach. I have gym membership because we don't have a practice facility or even a weight room to work out from. So I work out at Lifetime.
If anyone wants to sponsor Nneka or the LA Sparks and help them out, this
I
would
work
be an
out at
amazing
Lifetime.
opportunity.
That's where I go. Yeah, and it's funny because. So this is, I mean, you were saying so many things. And so Chanae has this, my sister, she works for ESPN, and we have these conversations all the time. And she talks about how the difference between men and women, which I think right now is why our sport is growing, is because of that accessibility nature. It's because for so long, since there was only one seat at the table, we had to differentiate ourselves.
Right.
And so that's what adds the personability to things.
Yeah.
That's why we already have a social media that shows who we are, because we had to do it to show that we were different from the next person.
That's right.
And so now that the generation is more about following this player than this team, women's sports is growing fast, because every
already doing
woman has to show who they are, because that's how the system was designed, so that you could have that one seat. But now, because that accessibility has already been established, because now you know more about me, Nkeka Ogwumike, people now know I'm Nigerian American, and now the men are trying to catch up to it. So you see these tonal walks, we were doing it way before them. Yeah. You see everybody expressing themselves with their hair, women were doing it first. Women, especially women of color, are drivers of culture. And so now that you have a generation that is literally at the driver's seat of culture, that's what they're seeking. And so I say this to say that I had to invest in myself because, one, I needed to have balance for me to be able to do what I needed to do. But then also, two, I could be at the grocery store and I could get a sponsorship deal because someone sees me in the grocery store and knows I play for the LA Sparks. Yeah. Whereas if I'm KD, I'm not walking in the grocery store by myself. There's all of these businessmen, millionaires, billionaires that are just bringing things to me. So there's no personability. Yeah. There's no personability. And so someone could come up to me and say, hey, I saw Nneka in the grocery store. She was an ass. Mm-hmm. And that could affect an opportunity for me. But I'm just trying to grab some milk.
Right.
But I have to be on all the time, because as women, we have to be on all the time. And so differentiating the performative aspect with who I am, who I'm comfortable in this space, forces me to be authentic everywhere I go. Because I'd rather be authentic than performing. Because then if we seal the deal and I'm not what you thought I was,
right,
that's the last opportunity that I could get. And so understanding that and understanding what investment in my well-being means, I had to put boundaries on myself, because sometimes, like I said, I could be out in the store and, I can't just be in the mall, someone could walk up to me and I have to engage with this fan. And so a lot of times that had to do with, like me making sure that I have, for example, something that I learned in the pandemic, I was one of those that was like, I'm gonna wake up whenever I want, take this call whenever I want. That did not work. And so now I have like a cutoff time, like my workout time, my training time, nothing before 11 a.m. And I don't take any calls after like 6. It depends on who it is. But like I have like set hours. I have like set hours to establish, this is Nneka the working woman. And then when I wake up, I consider my mornings very sacred, very reverent, even if I'm working, because that's my working time to train. And so investing in an SC person, investing in a nutritionist, honestly, investing in my travel, because we travel almost way more in the off season than we do in season with all of these brand partnership and sponsorship deals. And so
South by Southwest appearances.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So not just taking a red eye because I need to get there, taking my time, ensuring that, like last night, I was just telling Thayer, I was in LA yesterday morning, I flew to Houston, had to do my workout, had to repack my bag, and then I drove, because I'm from Houston, I drove the 2.5 hours to Austin. I don't have a PJ, but because I don't have a PJ, I'm not just gonna drive straight from LA to Austin and just figure it out. No, because then I'm not gonna bring my best self here for you, which you deserve. Mm-hmm. And I also deserve to be my best self up here too, because you never know what opportunities and relationships are born from these types of situations. And so that investment in understanding myself and understanding how I can be my best self in every room that I come into, understanding that I can have an authentic relationship, connection, network with the person that I'm looking at is very important. Yeah. But we've had to do that since birth. And that's why the investment in women's sports is exponential. Right. Because we've almost been forced to do this. Yeah. And so it weighs on, okay, do I perform, which is where a lot of people get lost in the sauce with social media and putting content out. Because when they ask you to put out all this content, is it because you love it? Were you on YouTube? Were you on Vine back in the 2000s? Or
Shout out
did
Vine.
you just create this page and you can now monetize it, but you're now representing brands that you don't actually consume,
right.
And so it's important to understand that. Yeah, and women get that because we have to do that every day.
That's right.
And so that investment in my well-being kind of comes with it comes with this foundation of authenticity and intentionality.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel comfortable coming to, like, I wouldn't have come here if I didn't believe in Sportico, if I didn't believe in the collective, if I didn't want to meet Amanda. I'm not going to come here just because
I wanted to meet
Wasserman,
you too.
I'm not coming here just because Wasserman says, hey, we have this deal. I've said no to things that were going to pay me money because I just don't align with that.
That's right.
And that's what we've had to do so long. And that's why now investment in ourselves matters so much more, because we have to be who we are and be the best to get half as far.
Yes.
That
Preach.
just,
Right. Go
yeah,
ahead.
you just spoke to my soul. I mean, you literally, I had no idea.
A question or two, too.
I just didn't, wow, that's literally how I've led my life, and had no idea that is just like what you have to do. Like, I've never heard someone else verbalize it.
Yeah,
So
it's
it is that intersection of authenticity is not just something nice to have, it's imperative to have, because it's the only way to take care of yourself. That was like the best advice I was ever given, and I don't think that was the intention behind it, but what I've figured out as I evolved was I started out my career in New York City, and worked in the tri-state, and was driving my little Jeep Grand Cherokee that I got 16 years old to all of the small high schools, covering everything from football to lacrosse to high school wrestling, which was super weird, by the way. Interviewing a 98-pound child in a singlet was not, I had to really question what I was doing at some points, but we made it. And the best advice I had gotten during that time, you're trying to find the way that you present on camera. You're trying to find the way that you speak. You're really trying to emulate people, which is never the way to go. And one of my producers pulled me aside and said, listen, this is New York City. You have to be yourself, because people are going to see through you immediately, and you're going to get eaten alive. And it really kind of was that fear factor where I was like, I don't want to get eaten alive here. Like, I'm just going to be myself and see what happens. But what that turned into was realizing, listen, whether I succeed or fail, I will do it being the truest version of myself. And how scary would that be for me not to be authentic and to succeed and then have to keep up this facade for the rest of my life?
Right.
It's just not sustainable, to your point, right? If I am pretending to be one thing and then you go out into the wild and all these people are seeing you being a completely different thing, at some point those two things are going to come to a head and it's going to destroy you. And I think we can all
On a
probably
soul
think
level,
of a number of athletes, male in particular, where they appeared to be one way, they ended up being another way. And that crash and burn moment is just inevitable. But that intersection of authenticity and self-care, I travel about 40 weeks a year. And I had to be very clear with my coworkers that, yes, I needed to do certain things. They're going to go out to dinner. Well, I need to go to a yoga class. I'm going to meditate every morning. I'm going to be pretty vocal about burnout and journaling and going to therapy and talking about what my therapist told me and sharing it on social media, because that matters to me, right? Like that idea of taking care of yourself in a holistic way.
Normalizes it, I think,
and
for so many
normalizes
women.
it. Like, and for men too, right?
Yeah,
But just being exactly who I am ended up actually really enhancing my career, because I've always been who I am with the players I interview as well, right? They know exactly who I am. They know that I'm not perfect, but they also know that I'm never coming from a place that is going to put them in an intentionally bad
And
position.
players pay attention to that.
They do.
There's particular media I don't talk to because they're not real.
And you think this could, yes.
Yeah.
And it could be a gotcha moment, right? And that
Exactly.
was advice I was given by Sam McNaughton, my agent, one of my agents for, right in the beginning. He said, listen, golf is different. If you piss off someone as a 25-year-old player, he's still going to be here when he's 50, and he's not going to talk to you for 25 years.
Right.
And you're like, oh my God. And it's true, right? Like playing that long game, but also just remembering to treat the people you work with and the people that you interview as human beings. But you can't do that if you're not being authentic to yourself, if you're not taking care of yourself, and if you're not loving yourself. Like if I hate myself and I'm functioning fully out of fear, you're going to feel that because I'm coming at you in a very different way than if I'm comfortable with who I am and I really want to learn about what's going on and why something happened, right? I can ask a difficult question the same way someone else does, but the way I ask it comes off very differently because I'm not trying to prove myself to the viewer. I'm trying to get that player to open up to me because they're the ones that the viewers are here to see, right? So I don't think we get to that point without investing for me, investing in a therapist, investing in a consistent yoga practice, journaling when I'm feeling really terrible, setting boundaries, which is a word I just learned a couple years ago. It's been life-changing. Our head of talent doesn't always appreciate it. He'll call me and say, "Can you do this?" I'm like, "Ross, this is a boundary for me, and I told you I had off this week." And he's like, "What are these new words you use?" But it matters, and it's actually, what's refreshing is how open people are to it. Like self-care, I'm not sure was as respected 10, 15, 20 years ago as it is
we're
now.
in a system that was designed that way. And even
Yeah.
like, as you're saying, like a male athlete that was appearing to be a certain way, and we found out that there was this whole second life, men are victim to this as well.
Yes.
It's a system that was built for perception.
Yes.
And you're right. And imagine a journalist who's fear-based interviewing an athlete who's also fear-based. So now you're creating imagine. It's something that we're trying to break down today.
Yes.
And so when you are yourself, it is contagious.
That's right.
It's empowering, and it gives someone a proper perspective of like, oh, you know what? I'm not so crazy to feel like I don't want. There are days when I feel like I don't feel like doing something, when I really want to say something, but we're groomed to be a certain way. And you're right. It's all about just kind of dismantling all this and just kind of shedding everything so that it can be exactly what we envision it to be.
Yes.
It can be what we want it to be.
Yes.
But it starts with investing in yourself.
Yes.
So I didn't mean
And
to
pausing.
interject, but
No,
yeah.
it's true,
Okay, hold on.
but I will say, if you're thinking like, man, how does this apply to me? I promise you, if you want to start creating those boundaries, or you want to start, really it's the boundaries, right, with work and your bosses, like, people are open to it now. And like, that was the biggest thing I felt like when I started doing it, when I said no to certain assignments, and I had never said no in my entire career. I was really scared that was
course,
the
because as a
scarcity,
woman,
right, goes
you're
away.
working and working
And guess
so
what?
scared.
They respected it, and I still have a job. That blew my mind, right? So it just, I think that's something the whole world can apply now.
Right, absolutely. We know what happens if we don't.
Right.
So we might as well find out if we do.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're at time. They're
We're at
waiting
time.
and holding up watches.
Sorry, we were
So
going
great
in.
questions from the audience. Thanks so much for coming.
We were going in.
We're going to take this outside. Amanda, thank you so much for coming here. Nneka, thank you so much for journeying all the way from LA to Houston.
It
to
was
here.
not that serious. It's okay.
Okay.
I appreciate being here.
Really, and the best of luck in your season this
Yes,
season. We're cheering you on,
thanks.
for sure. LA Sparks, go team. And Amanda, we can't wait to see you back
I
out
know.
on the course.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.